Berserk fans, which person do you think Griffith is based on? Is Alexander the Great, with a little bit of Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch added to the mix for good measure, and I prove it. Griffith and Alexander the Great are in fact so similar that I can name characteristics and feats and you won't be able to guess who I'm talking about. Seriously, try. Guess along. A young, very handsome, super charismatic leader, an extremely ambitious man, considered one of the greatest military commanders, conquering enemy territory that was considered impregnable and beating impossible odds, winning against enemies that greatly outnumber him. A man whose ambitions were to conquer the world and who would stop at nothing to do so, even if it means thousands of his followers have to die for his dream. Yeah, all of that? That's Alexander the Great. But it fits Griffith like a glove. As if that wasn't enough, Alexander the Great integrated Persians into his Macedonian army and married a foreign princess, even though his own people were strictly opposed to the idea. What does that remind you of? Oh yeah, Griffith integrated the foreign Kushan and demons into his army even though people were against it. As for the ruthlessness, Griffith and Alexander have that in common too. Get this. On his way to India, Alexander's men refused to go forward, so Alexander insisted on crossing the desert, an undertaking that cost the lives of 12,000 of his men, 3/4 of his army. They all had to die for Alexander's ambition. And I do mean that literally, because Alexander could have traveled via the safe coast path, but his ambition made him choose the desert path because Cyrus the Great was never able to cross the desert, and Alexander the Great had to be greater than Cyrus. Because conquering everything from Greece to India by the age of 30 wasn't enough. Random bonus fact. Did you know that Julius Caesar was inspired by Alexander the Great? When Julius was around 30 years old, he saw a statue of Alexander and thought, man, this dude accomplished a lot by the age of 30. I want to be like him. So he ended up becoming Julius goddamn Caesar. But by crossing the desert, Alexander also wanted to punish his men who refused to go forward to India because they stood in his way in his quest to conquer the world. So sacrificing his people by the thousands for his own ego, dream, and ambition? Yeah, Griffith took a page out of that book and then some. Though you could say Griffith was more humble, at least in naming his city. After all, he only called it Falconia, which is just slightly less obvious than Alexander, who just straight out went with Alexandria. So their ego is a similarity, but so is the fact that despite of it, they put their lives on the line and fought at the front lines of every battle. But that's to be expected from somebody who can be considered the embodiment of the Übermensch. After all, Nietzsche's definition for that term is the ideal superior man of the future who could rise above conventional morality to create and impose his own values. That very definition is also essentially Griffith in a nutshell, and that makes the parallel to Alexander the Great so perfect because Nietzsche considered Alexander to be a real-life prototype for the Übermensch, a leader that naturally rises to the top and exercises rule according to his own will. Again, that's Griffith in a nutshell, except Griffith didn't exactly rise to the top naturally and can hardly be considered a mensch anymore. Interestingly, Griffith's breaking point, the eclipse and the events leading up to it, particularly his loss to Guts, was exactly when he diverted from being the definition of the Übermensch, and it was from that point onwards that Guts beautifully fulfills the idea of the Übermensch by naturally rising to the top. But Guts and Nietzsche, that's a different topic for another video. Though Miura never mentioned Alexander the Great or Nietzsche's influences, we don't always need confirmation to see obvious parallels. Plus, both Alexander's story and Nietzsche's concepts are so grand, they are hard to evade and influenced a lot of contemporary content, even if subconsciously. Look no further than Shanks from One Piece being inspired by Alexander the Great. Actually, look as far as my video. I did a video on that. And Superman, who is based on Nietzsche's Übermensch, but if you want to see a video on Superman and Nietzsche, drop a comment. And if you like what I do here, then please consider hitting that plus button because I do these mythological historical backgrounds for anime and manga every day. And if you follow, then I'll see you tomorrow. Alright?